Hey there, and thanks for coming back to the channel. Now today we're just going to discuss a couple Nintendo 64 controllers and a couple features about them and what I like about them, and then my personal rank. So don't take this personally or anything, this is just what I believe about the controllers and everything. We're also going to be doing a controller test on the Nintendo 64 so that you can see some of the differences between the controllers and the gates and everything. But I'll be doing that at the end of the video. So for this first part of the video, we're just going to be talking about the controllers themselves. So what I have here, and we're going to go from left to right, over here is a Hoary Pad Mini. You know, if you're familiar with the N64, you're familiar with these. These are highly desirable controllers. They're form-fitting. They're more of a normal controller back in the day, and that's what you would choose. Obviously, this is the standard controller. This is the Funtastic Purple. And then lastly, I have over here is the Retro Fighters Brawler 64, which if you're familiar with N64, you know that this is a pretty popular one these days. Last but not least, I also have a Tribute 64 controller. Now this is a USB one, so it will not be participating in the controller review overall, but I just wanted to put it in here just to show you guys that I have it and that it's a direct comparison to the Horipad Mini. I'll be doing a separate video on that just to show what the features are and to show the actual differences face to face and everything. I know there's been a million videos on it already, but nonetheless. So the thing that I love about the Horipad Mini is really the feel to it. It's got a nice compact form-fitting feel. It's very easy to use. It reminds me of an old school, you know, or actually like a modern day controller. It's got the Z triggers on both sides. That is a negative to some, but the only complaint I have, and it's actually something to compare with the Tribute 64, is that the Z trigger is slightly larger on the Tribute 64, and I kind of wish that the Horipad Mini had a slightly larger Z trigger, just because sometimes it is kind of confusing between L and Z because they're the exact same shape and form. But overall, this controller is the bee's knees. I absolutely love it. It's probably my personal favorite controller and my #1 choice in the selection that I have. Now, with the standard controller, everybody knows what the standard controller is all about. Personally, I like to use these for D-pad driven games just because that grip gives you that traditional grip, and it's absolutely incredible. That is an awesome Nintendo 64 grip. Now, I'll still play it sometimes for normal games and use that, but I have relatively big hands, and also I have a lot of issues in my wrists and my fingers and stuff, so I get cramped up really easily, so I have to go for larger controllers. Now, last but not least, over here we have the Retro Fighters Brawler 64, and a modern day controller, a modern day take on the Nintendo 64 controllers. This one, in my opinion, is very close second to the Horipad Mini in terms of my personal preference. They did do what I like. They made the Z trigger just a little bit bigger. Now the response to it is been a little bit back and forth, but overall this is a very, very popular controller, and this is something that I would recommend to anybody that's looking for a third-party controller. Go with the Brawler. That is the best, in my opinion, as far as what your modern offerings are today. Don't go with the crap that you see hanging off the shelf for $15, $12. It's not going to be good. This is in the $30 range, so you are going to pay somewhat of a controller premium. You can also go with the Tribute 64 by Retrobit. This is a great controller. Like I said, mine is a USB version, but it is still, I have owned the 64 version of this. I just recently got rid of it when I got the Horipad Mini. But it is a great controller overall, and another really, really good choice to consider when you're looking for a third-party controller, a modern-day controller. I would just stay away from, the stuff that's unbranded or some of the stuff that has some questionable brand names to it. I would stay away from those, but those are the options. But like I said, in my personal opinion, I would like to rank the Horipad Mini as my #1 choice, followed close second with the Brawler 64. And it's really just depending on the game and depending on how my hands are feeling that day will depend on which controller that I use. It's honestly a 50-50 toss-up. Again, with the 64 controller, the standard one, I use it mostly for D-pad driven games, so stuff like wrestling games or like Mischief Makers was a game that used the D-pad, that kind of stuff. Now, when I am testing out programs and testing out homebrew on my EverDrive, I will use a standard controller just because, hopefully that's the way the developers intended the controllers, to be used. So I just want to use that just to make sure that, when I am testing something, I'm testing it the way it was intended to be tested. Then lastly, this I would rank 4th overall, even as a Nintendo 64 controller and not a USB like what I have here. I would rank this 4th overall out of the group. It just feels a little bit cheaper, and obviously it's a little bit cheaper than the Retro Fighters, but it feels a little bit cheaper in your hands, but it's a hell of a controller. Especially for that $20 price point that it sits at. You can't go wrong with it. There's no Nintendo 64 controller at $20 that's going to beat the Tribute 64. And then now what we're going to do is we're going to remove the Tribute 64 out of the equation, since that is a USB controller and I can't test it on the EverDrive. But we're going to use these 3 controllers. We're going to test the gate. Now this controller I have refurbished to have a very solid controller gate, so it's not going to be all wonky or weird or loose. Like some controllers are that are, kind of aged and everything. This one does have a pretty tight stick, so we will see, normal Nintendo 64 controller results out of it. But we're going to be just running a quick short test of all 3 controllers so you can see how the analog stick gate is compared to what a regular Nintendo 64 controller offers, in comparison to the Horipad Mini and the Brawler 64. And then lastly, I'll just give a brief explanation as to, what that actually entails. But so just let me get set up here, and we'll be right back. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and do the controller test. Now we're going to start with the standard Nintendo 64 controller as our point of reference. And the application that we're using also will have a reference to show. But let me get to the test here. So we're going to go ahead and follow the instructions. And I might mess this up, so we might have to do it more than once. It sometimes gets a little bad with my... no, I did it okay. So you can see there, that's going to be roughly, if you see the white points there, that's going to be roughly what a perfect Nintendo 64 controller is going to try to hit. And let's see here, there we go, a new analog stick. They're going to try to hit all of those points that are shown right there. So let's cycle back to mine. That's what my results are showing. So you can see the difference between the two. So it's really close. And like I said, my stick has been worked on a little bit by myself, and I'm still working on it. I'm going to add some a nice steel sticks bowl to it to try to help with the gate a little bit and everything. But overall, that's what you're going to be expecting from a standard Nintendo 64 controller. So now we're going to move on to the Horipad Mini. So back during the day when you had your 64, what option would you have as an alternative? So this is what we're going to go ahead and do. So as you can see, we're going to be using the Horipad Mini. let's get to the section here. Now, the Horipad Mini and the Brawler 64 are going to have a GameCube style controller. GameCube style analog stick. So basically, they're going to have a larger gate than what the 64 gate is going to have. And voila, there you can see. The Horipad Mini, it has a very good octagonal gate, but it is very wide. That's the only bad part about it. But the thing is that it makes it very sensitive when you're moving in like Mario or something. If you just lightly push upwards, it's going to be a lot easier to do some of his, some of his moves and everything. But it's also going to be very sensitive to it. But that's just what you can expect. Again, that's the original, and then that's what mine looks like with the Horipad Mini. So if you were able to tolerate a GameCube style stick, which most people are these days because they're awesome, that's what you can kind of expect. So lastly, I'm going to move on to the Brawler 64, and then we're going to close out this video. Alrighty, so now we're working with the Brawler 64 controller, and we're going to go ahead and do the exact same test. And I feel like it's easier to do this test with the Brawler because it has those octagonal points that you can feel in it. But you see, it's just kind of weird. And I probably did the test a little bad, so let's try it one more time. There we go. I mean, it's very similar. You can see that the gate is close, but there is some problems there. And I own multiple Brawler 64 controllers, so you can trust me in saying that you're going to have slightly different gates depending on the controller stick. It's not as impactful as what it might seem. So like you can see, that's the original analog stick. And then we're going to this one. But it's going to have a very similar kind of gate to what this is more similar to what the Horipad Mini had. And that's why, a lot of people compare the analog sticks of the Tribute 64 and the Brawler 64 to being like a Horipad Mini, where it's just more sensitive. So you just got to be careful and pay attention to that and know that your stick is more sensitive when you are using these in comparison to the original analog stick. But nonetheless, you still can't go wrong with this, even though the gate is a little weird. 9 times out of 10 in most of your games, that little difference in the gate is not going to have any impact. And again, it's really just about the sensitivity, and it's about trying to just ease up on some of your controls. That's really the only suggestion I have if you do run into these problems. Otherwise, this controller is absolutely wonderful. And again, like I said, the Tribute 64 will yield very similar results in terms of the analog stick. But the buttons, compared from the Brawler 64 to the Tribute 64, I find the buttons and the face of the buttons to be a lot better on the Brawler 64 compared to the Tribute 64. So just keep that in mind. So that's the end of this video. I really thank you guys for taking the time to watch it. I know it's a little long and everything, and I know the quality's not the greatest, but I did want to run down through all of this and give you guys just a rundown of my controllers and what I see and what I personally prefer. So like I said, I personally prefer the Horipad Mini as the #1 choice, followed close second by this Brawler 64, even with the little slightly wonky gate. And then in third, I think the standard controller is fine, but all three of those are just absolutely incredible controllers. You can't go wrong with any of them. The big thing, lastly, is that the Tribute 64 I find to be the 4th best controller available out there. But again, at that $20 price point, if you can't find a really good condition controller, standard controller, which you can find them at the $20 price point, but if you can't find one, then definitely go with a Tribute 64 because they are good controllers, and they will tide you over until you A, can find the right controller, or B, have the money to invest into something like a Horipad Mini or one of those, one of these $80 to $100 custom controllers that have been upgraded with custom parts and all that jazz. But anyways, thanks for watching. If you like it, I'd love to have a subscription, a like, a comment, anything. I'm very appreciative and very responsive to everything. So thanks for watching, and enjoy the rest of your day.